Minister, I'd like to ask you if you will support the progress to committee stage of the Industrial Relations provisions in respect of pension entitlements of Retired Workers Bill 2021. The proposals your department has to enhance the representative rights of retired workers, and if you will make a statement on the matter, please.
Yes, Deputy Richmond again, I believe. Thank you very much, Deputy, for the question. Deputy, I understand that you've engaged already quite a bit with the Department in relation to this bill, which is very welcome, and encourage that going forward. As Deputy Smith is aware, the Joint Committee on Enterprise, Trade and Employment met in public session on the 25th of January to discuss detailed scrutiny of the industrial relations provisions in respect of pension entitlements of Retired Workers Bill 2021. Following this meeting, my department was asked by the Joint Committee to provide a briefing in response to the issues raised in order to assist the Joint Committee with its detailed scrutiny. This detailed brief has now been prepared and has been issued to the Joint Committee. At the second stage debate on the bill, my predecessor as Minister for State outlined my department's concerns in relation to the proposed bill, and these concerns do remain. The bill, as introduced by Deputy Smith, seeks to create a third category in industrial relations, contrary to international practice, which recognises industrial relations as management of work-related obligations and entitlements between employers and workers and their representatives. Introduction of a third party to collective bargaining procedures has the potential to create significant disharmony in the industrial relations system. Department officials have been unable to find another jurisdiction where such a third category has been introduced in industrial relations legislation. Adding to this concern, the third category would also be unregulated and would not require a negotiating licence. This could cause a proliferation of representative groups, sometimes with competing demands. It would make it impossible for employers to identify who they should be negotiating with. For the first time also, the interests of a small group of retired workers will be put against those of current workers in the industrial relations sphere, creating potentially significant disharmony. A position may arise where certain retired workers' representatives are at odds with trade unions representing deferred members. If a person is in receipt of an occupational pension, they are no longer a worker and do not have an employment relationship with their former employer. The relationship lies with the trustees of the pension fund. Trustees have the statutory and fiduciary duties to act in the best interests of all members to have a fund. Trustees must always be consulted if a collective agreement refers to a pension matter. To ensure that the views of all stakeholders were considered in relation to this issue, the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment ran a consultation process in March 22, and all submissions received have been published on the Department's website. While some were supportive, we also had many showing real concern about this proposal. However, it is up to the Deputy to progress the bill to committee stage. Deputy?
Okay, thanks very much. I do note that what you're saying there about the status of retired workers and the dangers of a third party coming into negotiations. But just to be clear, what these workers are seeking is that the 6-month limitation after you leave your work and you want to have a problem with your pension, you can go to the WRC. They want that 6 months limitation lifted in order to allow them to go to the WRC at any stage after 6 months, that their pension becomes the subject of negotiations. And we've seen this happen time and time again, and in particular, and this has been the bone of contention since the bank bailout and the austerity measures were adopted, many of these are workers who worked in the public sector and the semi-state and built this state. They're retired, they're now, going on 15 years or 13 years fighting to change this, and they're not going to last forever. And I'm asking you to give us some sense of what the government's attitude is to this bill, because the committee's attitude will be determined by that as well.
Minister? As I said, there was very serious concerns raised with this bill by my predecessor, and those concerns remain, Deputy, to be quite frank. Whilst we're extremely sympathetic to the plight and the case of the individuals who have been involved in drafting this bill, many of whom I would have met both as a senator and as a TD, constituents and other representative groups as well. But there is 7 very serious concerns with this piece of legislation from the government's point of view, and I've touched on some of them in my opening response, but just to stress here, like a couple others. At present, the WCR negotiation mechanisms work on a voluntary basis where parties come to the WC to resolve industrial disputes to their mutual benefit. It's not clear what would motivate an employer to such negotiations in this category, it is also concerned that an entitlement for retired persons to engage in collective bargaining with employers will be a considerable disincentive to employers to voluntarily offer any pensions above the legal minimum obligation. And finally, the measures in the PMB we feel could severely undermine the existing dispute resolution bodies which are provided to retired workers to vindicate their rights, including the Pensions Authority, and would undermine the separation of powers between pension fund trustees and employers, which has been deliberately legislated for in order to protect retired workers.
Deputy Finance Supplementary.
The lived experience of 500,000, there is 500,000 retired workers who are represented by the people who met the previous Minister, now Deputy Damien English, with me. There's quite a few retired workers' organisations, but they do represent a significant cohort of retired workers. They're not, however, retired voters, and they paid into a pension scheme, an occupational pension scheme, which is basically their deferred wages. And whenever that's being tampered with in order for the government or others to achieve other means, they want to be sitting at the table to have their voice heard. Now, telling them that you have access to an ombudsman or an equality officer or within 6 months to the WRC is not going to cut the mustard, because they've been down that alley and they've had negative experiences and it doesn't do it for them. These are people I'm talking about in their late 70s, 80s, late 80s, who are willing to fight this. And if the government doesn't come up with a solution, let them know that. And they'll go back and talk to each other and come up with their next step.
Minister, final reply.
Yeah, Deputy, as outlined, I have met these groups before in as capacity as a Senator TD. I'd be more than willing to take them up with you for a further meeting going forward. But there is very serious concerns with this approach and the very serious impact it would have on the industrial relations mechanism. And I think it's in all of our interest to work towards an element of solution and an element of inclusivity. I'm prepared to do that with you. I'm only new to this brief, but perhaps we can arrange a meeting in the next couple of weeks with that representative body before the next stage, if that would be something that you'd be interested in. That's what I'm suggesting here. Because I do hear your concerns, and they are very valid concerns, but we just believe that the bill, as drafted and the mechanism proposed, wouldn't be appropriate. Yes.